Welcome to this explainer on the Cuban Revolution. We're diving right into one of the most mind-bending, improbable political upsets of the 20th century. We are going to unpack exactly how a tiny, wildly under-equipped rebel band somehow managed to overthrow a massive US-backed military regime, and in the process, completely alter global geopolitics.
Just think about this for a second to really grasp the sheer scale of this David versus Goliath story. You had fewer than 20 rebels who actually survived their initial amphibious landing in 1956. And they were going up against Fulgencio Batista's National Army, which was 37,000 strong. I mean, it sounds literally impossible, right? Yet, in just a few short years, those surviving rebels would completely dismantle that massive military force. So how on earth did they do it? Okay, here is our roadmap for today. We're going to cover 1. Cuba's 1950s powder keg. 2. The Moncada Assault. 3. Guerrillas in the mountains. 4. The fall of Batista. And 5. Global shockwaves and legacy. Section 1. Cuba's 1950s powder keg. To really get why this revolution happened, we have to rewind to the 1950s and look at the severe conditions that made the island so ripe for rebellion.
Picture this. 1950s Cuba was a place of extreme, undeniable contrasts. On one hand, you've got Havana. It's incredibly glamorous. In fact, in 1954, it literally had the highest number of Cadillacs per capita in the entire world. It was this lavish playground of luxury hotels and mob-run casinos, heavily tied to figures like Meyer Lansky. But out in rural Cuba, completely different reality. Only about 15% of rural households even had running water. And the sugarcane workers, who were basically the backbone of the economy, well, they only labored for about 100 days a year during the harvest. The rest of the year, they faced absolutely crushing unemployment.
So you've got this massive wealth gap, which is destabilizing enough on its own. But it wasn't just that. The economy was dangerously reliant on U.S. sugar quotas, unemployment was ticking up, and endemic corruption was just draining the country. The real breaking point, though, that hit in 1952 when Fulgencio Batista led a military coup. He overthrew the emerging democracy and totally suspended constitutional rights. Basically, he closed the door on any legal avenues for change, creating an absolute powder keg of frustration. Section 2. The Moncada Assault. This is where the spark really catches fire. So, July 26, 1953, a young lawyer named Fidel Castro, along with his brother Raul, lead roughly 126 rebels to attack the Moncada military barracks. Militarily, it was a complete disaster. Many rebels were killed right there or executed shortly after, and the Castro brothers were captured and sentenced to up to 15 years in prison. But here is where history takes a massive turn. In 1955, bowing to public pressure, Batista makes a huge miscalculation. He grants the rebels amnesty. Freed, the Castros immediately flee to Mexico, and they form the 26th of July movement, naming it after the date of that very first failed attack. And this is a brilliant example of how a catastrophic military defeat gets transformed into a massive political victory. During his trial for that Moncada attack, Castro delivers a 4-hour speech and drops this now famous line, "Condemn me, it does not matter. History will absolve me." He essentially weaponized his own trial. He used it to lay out all his grievances against the dictatorship, which humanized his cause and really galvanized anti-Batista sentiment all across the country, way before he even packed his bags for Mexico. Section 3. Guerrillas in the mountains. Now we get to the actual insurgency in the rough terrain of the Sierra Maestra. Late 1956, 82 rebels cram onto a yacht called the Grandma. Keep in mind, this boat was designed for like 12 people. They sail from Mexico to Cuba, get ambushed practically the second they land, and fewer than 20 men survive to escape into the Sierra Maestra mountains. They are vastly outnumbered, totally cut off. Going toe-to-toe in conventional combat? No way. To survive, they had to rely entirely on asymmetric warfare. This is when the weaker side ditches the traditional rulebook and uses highly unconventional strategic tactics. So how do 20 guys fight an army? They rolled out a multi-pronged strategy. Step 1. They absolutely had to win over the local peasants. By paying for food and treating locals with respect, they built alliances that gave them vital intelligence and basically a human shield. Step 2. They fired up Radio Rebelde, a pirate radio station that broadcasted their message right past government censors and deep into enemy territory. And step 3, which is crucial, they weren't just fighting in the mountains. They coordinated heavily with an underground urban network led by revolutionaries like Frank Pais. These guys ran sabotage and strikes in the cities, effectively forcing Batista to fight a grueling two-front war. As these rebel tactics actually start working, Batista's regime completely panics. His forces resort to horrific torture and executions in the cities, trying to crush that urban underground. But this brutality backfires massively. It horrified the Cuban public and totally alienated his international backers. So much so that by March 1958, the United States slaps an arms embargo on Batista's government. This was basically a death blow to his military edge. It famously left his Air Force planes completely grounded just because they couldn't import spare parts from the US anymore. Section 4. The Fall of Batista. The regime's military advantage is slipping, morale is tanking, and things move incredibly fast from here. Summer of '58, Batista tries one last massive push. It's called Operation Verano. He sends 12,000 troops up into the mountains. But here's the thing. A lot of them were untrained conscripts, and the hardened guerrillas just ran circles around them, springing traps and taking the win. After that, the rebels flip the script and go on the offensive. They win the Battle of Visa in November, and right on New Year's Eve, they capture the pivotal city of Santa Clara. Realizing the gig is finally up, Batista packs his bags and flees the country on January 1, 1959. If you want to understand rebel resourcefulness, just look at that decisive Battle of Santa Clara. Led by Che Guevara and Camilo Cienfuegos, the guerrillas were up against a really well-defended military garrison. They were totally outgunned, so they resorted to psychological tactics and literal homemade warfare. I'm talking about converting a standard farm tractor into a makeshift armored tank encased in iron plates, complete with flamethrowers. It was this crazy blend of relentless pressure and sheer ingenuity that finally broke the military's back and sent Batista running. Section 5. Global shockwaves and legacy. Because taking Havana, that was really just chapter 1 of a very complex story. The immediate aftermath was, well, incredibly messy. Power was consolidated lightning fast. At first, a democratic provisional government was set up, but the moderate voices were sidelined almost immediately. The new regime kicked off summary trials. Some of these literally only lasted hours, leading to mass executions of former Batista officials, which really alarmed the international community. Then, the elections they had promised were delayed and eventually suspended indefinitely, and foreign properties, mostly American, were swiftly nationalized. And looking back at how quickly relations deteriorated, there's this really fascinating reflection from U.S. President John F. Kennedy in 1963. He said, "It is as though Batista was the incarnation of a number of sins on the part of the United States. Now we shall have to pay for those sins." Kennedy was acknowledging that American policies had inadvertently fueled the Castro movement by backing a deeply flawed and corrupt Batista dictatorship in the first place. So all this rapid nationalization of the economy, the centralization of power, and rising human rights concerns triggered a massive, multi-generational exodus out of Cuba, and it happened in waves. You had the golden exiles of the upper and middle classes fleeing early on, then the freedom flights, the infamous Mario boat lift in 1980, right through to the rafter crisis of the 90s. This relentless outflow fundamentally changed the map, draining Cuba of professionals while building a huge, highly influential exile community over in Florida. And globally, the realignment was seismic. Totally alienated from the US, especially after the punishing trade embargo and the failed Bay of Pigs invasion, Cuba pivots hard toward the Soviet Union. The Soviets step in with huge economic subsidies and military backing. Overnight, the island transforms into the ideological heart of the Cold War in Latin America. And, of course, in 1962, the placement of Soviet nuclear weapons on Cuban soil famously brought the entire planet to the absolute brink of nuclear war.
Which leaves us with this final, kind of mind-blowing thought. How did a small, localized rebellion, one that essentially started with fewer than 20 exhausted guys hiding out in the mountains, manage to so profoundly shape world history, inspire global insurgencies, and dictate the temperature of the Cold War for half a century? It really shows you the unpredictable, explosive power of asymmetric warfare. Thanks for hanging out with me for this explainer, and remember to always keep questioning the history that shapes our world.